We'll get started here in a few minutes while participants are joining. Well, it looks like I'm not seeing the number of participants tick up, so I think everyone has joined. For those that will join a little bit late, this presentation will be out on the website too, so I'll go through that. So Kelly, next slide. Just to give everyone kind of an update on how the meeting format is going to run today. We'll have a presentation today with speakers. You can ask questions using the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. You should be able to see it, and I've kind of highlighted it in a larger view over here on the right. You can click that, you can type in your questions. Those will be going to our comment moderator, Kia. She'll introduce herself here in a bit. And then she will present those questions to our panelists to answer. We'll have pauses during each of the presentation at strategic points in the presentation for you to answer those questions. So please feel free to put as many questions as you go through and you have, and we'll answer them as we go. The presentation and exhibits that you see today will be out on northsplit.com/landscape. And if you have comments on the landscape plans, please submit those to info@northsplit.com. We're requesting those comments be back to us by December 10th so that we can coordinate with the design build team. For the meeting agenda, we'll do welcome and introductions today. We'll give a construction update. We'll also give an update on the noise barrier and color and texture results. We'll go through the aesthetic and enhancement implementation plan. We'll also go through the landscape and side slope plan at each of the neighborhoods. We'll do next steps and then we'll adjourn. Welcome, my name's Erica Johnson. I work for HNTV. I'm part of the communications team that's helping answer a lot of public information and questions throughout the project.
Mohammed Siddiqui with Superior Construction. I work as the design build coordinator, and I'll be providing construction update in today's presentation.
Oh, Ken, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. I'm Ken Boyce. I'm with Ratio Architects. We're part of the Superior Design Build team, and we'll be talking about the aesthetic enhancements today.
And I'm Kia Gillette. I'm with HNTV. I'm the environmental lead for the project, and I'll be moderating questions.
This is the 4th virtual public meeting that we've held, and all of the transcripts for the prior ones, as well as this one, will be posted out on the landscape part of the NorthSplit website that I just mentioned. If there are people that are unable, that you know or speak of, that were unable to join any of these 4 sessions, please direct them to go out on the website. The presentation will be there, as well as then the transcripts and other questions, as well as the landscape plans for you to review. Now I'll turn it over to Mohammed to talk about the construction update.
Thanks, Erica. So as you all are aware, I'll begin with the construction overview of the project. This project, when it's finally completed, will have I-65, I-70 NorthSplit interchange and the adjoining roadways completely redone. As part of the project, we are demolishing and completely reconstructing over 40 existing bridges. And you'll see in the later part of my presentation on what side streets exactly those bridges are at. As part of this project, we'll be correcting some of the biggest safety concerns that are currently existing, and it'll remove operational deficiencies which lead to congestions and bottlenecks. And we're doing that by flattening some of the horizontal curves and making them more smoother. Also part of this project is a significant aesthetics and design improvements project, which Ken will be talking about later in his presentation today. Also, the project will get all new lighting and signage within the right-of-way of the project footprint. Moving on to the next slide. Here, we're going to talk a little bit about the milestones we've achieved to date and what lies ahead of us. We began the project construction about a year ago after completion of the final phase of the design drawings. And the first milestone that was achieved was in the first week of October this year, which was about last month, that we opened up Michigan Collector Distributor exit ramp. On your screens, you can see on the right-hand, upper right-hand corners, picture of the newly paved Michigan CD ramp with its roadway features, including guardrail and the next generation surfacing and all that. This was open to traffic on October 11th. And also on the lower right-hand corner, you see the picture of the newly constructed St. Clair Bridge that carries the traffic on it currently. The bridge is not in its final configuration. There's still a lot of aesthetic and enhancement features that are needed to be added on it. That's a work in progress, but it is serving its functional use right now. Maintenance of traffic, as you guys are aware, truck restrictions are currently in place. And I believe the eastbound Ohio Street leading to Pine Street, which was closed for demolition of the CSX bridges, is scheduled to be open this week. The construction will continue to go through the winter and all of next year until Thanksgiving of 2022. As part of the commitments towards this project, one of the two ramps, Michigan CD or the Ohio CD, had to be kept open at all times. So while the Michigan CD construction was going on, Ohio's collector distributor was open. And now that the traffic is flowing through Michigan CD ramp, Ohio CD exit is closed for construction, and it will be open back up once the construction is completed. Moving on to the next slide. Here's a quick aerial picture providing you an isometric view of the interchange itself. The big hammerhead bents and piers that you see will get the 800 feet long structure 34, which will be one of the highlights of the project. It's a 10-span bridge, which is over 800 feet long. Like I mentioned earlier, here's all the side streets that are mentioned on the screen that will get all the new bridges as part of this project. One thing that I would like to emphasize as well is the offline construction. We're trying to maximize the space between the open spaces between the current existing roads to do as much as we can without interrupting the flow of the traffic. So a lot of the construction that you see, most of the bridges and the new roadway and new alignment is being done utilizing those open spaces. And we'll be completing the construction by the end of next year. With that, Erica, I'd like to turn it back to you.
Was part of the public information, we had a request for the noise barrier and color textures. I'm just going to go through where the noise barriers were located before I get into the color and texture selection. The noise barrier 3W that you see here in yellow is on the east leg, what we're calling the east leg of the project. That goes from Lewis Street to Commerce. The next slide. And then wall 3E, which goes from Commerce to Valley on the north side of I-70. If you can go back a couple slides. Next. Okay. So as part of the noise barrier color, we sent out community survey to the benefited residents, and they provided input in June of 2021 on the texture and color. There was two different selections of texture and 3 colors. Of those survey results, Ashlar Stone, which is the upper right picture pattern, was selected, and then the color 1 gray down on the right was selected. We're anticipating construction to begin in summer of 2022 and anticipate substantial completion of the noise walls to be in place by November. With that, we'll pause for questions, and I'll turn it over to Kia.
Yeah, we're going to pause for just a second to see if we have any questions come in. Just as a reminder, if you go to the bottom of your screen, there's a Q&A button, so you can type your questions into that feature. And I'm not seeing any questions come in right now. There will be some additional opportunities later in the presentation, so we will keep moving along.
Okay, this is Ken Boyce, and I'm going to speak to the Aesthetic and Enhancement Implementation Plan, or AEIP, as some of you may know it. Next slide, please. The AEIP shows how the aesthetic design guidelines that were developed during the environmental and planning process are to be implemented in the final design. It further develops the aesthetic elements of the project based upon the final infrastructure design from the design build team, things such as the height, widths, and lengths of the elements that have been constructed or to be constructed, and then constructability issues, determining the best construction methods given the materials and final infrastructure design. The AEIP was completed by the design build team, and it includes things like the underpass treatments, retaining wall and bridge treatments, lighting, design, and plant materials. Next slide, please. Like the aesthetic design guidelines, the AEIP is broken into two general areas, one being infrastructure elements or hardscape, walls, piers, lighting, underpasses, and other construction items directly associated with the bridges and the roadway, as well as landscaping elements or plantings within the project area at side slopes, interchange, and the legs. The construction on some of the infrastructure elements has begun, and those that are living locally here have probably seen some of that work already completed. Other infrastructure elements and plantings will be included in the future work over the next year or so. So I'm going to speak a bit to the AEIP hardscape elements or infrastructure elements at this point in time. Next slide, please. So the underpass construction and bridge openings, as I indicated, some of that construction has been completed already, as you can see here with the image of the St. Clair Street Bridge. Most of this work, the enhancements will occur after the bridge construction is complete. Next slide, please. So the aesthetic design guidelines developed a uniform set of underpass treatments. So this graphic from the aesthetic design guidelines was used as the point of beginning for the design build team to translate this general design into the specifics of each bridge opening. And we'll go through a few of those, but you can see there's a requirement for a street name. There are monuments at each of four corners of the bridges, and green treatment on the beams underneath, and some character associated with some of the bridge rail too. Next slide, please. So this is an image of what the 10th Street Bridge is going to look like. It was classified within the design guidelines as a major gateway, requiring a specific application, a number of features, including the monuments at the corners of the bridge, adjacent to the abutment. So as you're approaching the bridge as a pedestrian or motorist, this is what you will see. The 10th Street name is incorporated on the guard, and you can tell that the character of this bridge is very similar to the design guideline section. This opening is considerably larger than the image from the design guidelines, but it's just a function of what is required for the 10th Street Bridge opening. Next slide, please. So we'll run through a series of these bridges to give you a sense of what the actual bridges are going to look like. So the Central Avenue Bridge, very similar. It's also a major gateway, and defined as a major gateway within the design guidelines, and this is what it will look like. It's got a shorter span than the one I just showed you at 10th, but otherwise the character is very similar. Next slide, please. College Avenue It's also a short span major gateway, so very similar enhancements required at this bridge. Next slide, please. And then the Washington Street Bridge, also a major gateway. This bridge is a bit unique in that it has a really long span, and it also has some longitudinal slope across that span. So you can see how the scale of the monuments at the two corners here are different depending on the side. Next slide, please. So the aesthetic guidelines identified requirements for special paving treatments for the walks under the bridges or through the underpasses. So it includes specialty pavers, some specific patterns in the cast place concrete, so forth. So next slide, please. So the AEIP then effort recorded the final resolution on the design of the pavements under the underpasses, finalizing the paver materials and patterns based upon constructability issues. Very similar character to the design guidelines. Next slide, please. So the aesthetic design guidelines also identified some requirements for some specialty lighting for the treatments for the walks through the underpasses, as well as lighting of the monuments at the corner and the faces of the bridges and so forth. So but you can see some down lighting on some of the piers, down lighting under the underpass, and then the up lights on the monuments. Next slide, please. So then the AEIP then took that information from the design guidelines, and we're seeking to implement that information and requirement. And in the process, we have made selections, final selections on the exact fixtures based upon the character was identified in design guidelines. So you can see this LED compact flood that will be lighting the monuments, providing up lighting for the monuments. There have been selections made for the light fixtures associated with some of the downlighting of the piers, as well as under the underpasses. Next slide, please. The general pier aesthetics were just also defined within the design guidelines. You can see this image from the design guidelines that establishes that character. So you have a series of reveals on the faces of the piers and on the ends to bring a little character and definition to the piers. There's battered face on the ends of the piers, and sort of details how the caps are to sit on the piers and so forth. So next slide, please. So the AEIP then, this is an image from the AEIP that sort of shows the character of the piers as they are being built now. The reveals have been kept very similar, a little bit of change on dimensions in order to ensure we get good concrete pours, not a bunch of voids and so forth in the pours. And you can see the proportions of the piers are a little bit different based upon what the structural engineers have recommended. So very similar character to what was established in the design guideline. Next slide, please. And as a part of the process that the design build team has put forth, superior mocked up, full-scale mock-ups of the pier stems. You can see the battered face on the pier as well as the reveals. As you get up close to those piers, you realize just how large the reveals are and so forth. But these mock-ups were done to verify shape and dimension and test for and verify finishes and colors and texture application. So it's a quality control tool that allows those that are involved in the process of building these to confirm that the processes and concrete mixes and all that sort of thing are appropriate for this application. Next slide, please. And this is a full-size mock-up of the cap of the pier. So again, testing for similar kinds of issues, making sure textures and colors and shapes and so forth are all correct. Next slide, please. And then this is a photograph of one of the piers that have been built. Mohammed showed you a bird's eye view of this, one of these piers or series of these piers earlier. You can see the reveals as they've been built. The character of the pier is enhanced with that reveal. The shadow play and so forth is nice and certainly enhances the character. You can see the battered face of the pier and then the detail of the cap. Next slide, please. Also, full-size mock-ups were built of the MSE wall panels. Some of these have been built and are in place, but again, the mock-up was done to ensure quality control for finishes, the colors, textures, etc. Next slide, please. And so this is a close-up look of the abutment at the St. Clair Street Bridge. The MSE panels in place. We'll be seeing a lot more of these going up over the next 12 months. Next slide, please.
All right, we're going to pause and answer some questions. We do have some that came in. This first question I'm going to direct to Mohammed and Jeff at Superior Construction. Can you please give more information and detail about the stormwater retention planned just south of O'Bannon Park?
Well, I'll take care of this one.
Thanks,
Excuse
Jeff.
me. I guess the question I have for the person asking the question, what kind of information are you specifically looking for? We have certain requirements for our contract. We have to design the retention for a 100-year storm, and the pond was sized accordingly to handle all the retention required. Is that the information you're looking for, or is there more specific information?
Jeff, they can't speak, so I'm not seeing any response.
Yeah, you're right. I forgot about that. My bad.
We'll keep going, and if we see a follow-up, we'll answer the follow-up question.
Okay.
Next question. Was the Section 106 input provided to Ratio to inform the development of the AEIP design? The Section 106 comments on the aesthetic design guidelines were provided to the design build team for their consideration during the development of the AEIP. Next question is, what are NDOT's plans for long-term maintenance of the landscaping installed as part of this construction project? I will start this answer and then I will hand it over to Ron Taylor to talk a little bit about the intent of the design. But the first part of this is for the first 3 years after planting, the first year is the responsibility of the design build team or Superior Construction's team to maintain. And NDOT is working and in discussions with Keep Indianapolis Beautiful for maintenance for the next 2 years. Following those 3 years after planting, it will be NDOT's responsibility to maintain the landscaping within the right-of-way. And at this point, Ron, could you maybe talk a little bit about the intent of the design during the development of the original aesthetic design guidelines?
Yeah, sure. I think if you recall, when you reviewed some of those things before, there was it was very intentional. The landscape design of this was very intentional in terms of the different typologies that were designed for the specific environments throughout the interchange. What Ken's going to show you later on in a presentation, he's going to show you how that has translated over to the planting plans. But I think conceptually, if you recall, what we were trying to do was create an urban forest type of environment with the tree canopy and with a lot of focus paid to the ground plane and making sure that what was out there had a very natural appearance, that it was able to remain, to continue to appear that way for longer periods of time with lower amounts of maintenance, and to be a little bit more overall, a little bit more sustainable, and have a secure ecosystem with a lower level of maintenance, or the type of maintenance that typically would happen long-term on an interstate corridor. And that's, I think it's not to say that it's a no maintenance type of landscape, but it certainly has been designed so that it has that natural feel for a longer period between maintenance cycles at NDOT.
Thanks, Ron. Next question. Is the design build team housed within Superior Construction or HNTB or NDOT? And this is a two-part question. I will answer that. The design build team is Superior Construction's team, and that includes a number of other firms and contractors on their team. But there is oversight provided by NDOT and HNTB. And the next part of this question, were these underpass designs subject to any local ordinance requirements, such as Indianapolis's Complete Streets Ordinance? And I'm going to yield to Ron and Ken in just a second, but to my knowledge, no. And we've had numerous conversations with the city, and I don't recall this ever coming up in any of our meetings. I guess Ron or Ken, anything to add?
I think, Ron, you may know more about that issue than I would.
Yeah, we did, as part of the initial design of this, we did not have to go through a review process for that specific ordinance, the Complete Streets. What I will say, though, is that part of the overall design and its urban setting made it so that we looked at a lot of the things that is typically included in that. So bicycle facilities that were in place are remaining in place. The sidewalks that you'll see that go under these underpasses are more generously sized to accommodate larger numbers of people and to be more pedestrian friendly. So those things have been taken into account and accounted for.
Okay, thank you, Ron. We have another question, and it says, I may have missed this, and Ken, I'm going to yield this to you. But assuming these similar designs, and we're talking about the underpass designs and lighting installations that will also be used for Central and Alabama, is that correct?
Depending on their classification as major gateway or not, there's a mix of different design features that are required. So the monuments aren't required at every opening, for instance, but the general character is very similar. Now, we don't have a representative drawing of, I think we showed Central, right? And
I was going to say, Ken, I believe that the AEIP addresses that question. I just don't know what page it's on. I think it talks about major and minor crossings. And I know Central was a major. I'm not sure about Alabama. But again, like I said, I think if you look at the AEIP, which is on the North Split website, I believe it addresses that question. I can't answer specifically whether or not all those streets have lighting or not.
Okay, next question. Will all existing damaged rusty chain link fences be removed? And if so, will they be replaced with black coated fences or standard chain link? And Jeff, correct me if I'm wrong, but we're removing the old fences in the overwhelming majority of areas and replacing with the black coated fence. There may be a few short areas along the west leg north side of 65 where we have some trees and do not disturb areas growing in the fence where it may remain. So we did not want to remove trees in some do not disturb areas. But Jeff, please correct me if that's not correct.
You are correct. That is the way we approached it. There were some areas where trees were in. Rather than cutting the trees down, we decided to leave the trees in and just leave the fence in. So you are correct, Kia.
But the overwhelming majority of the areas where there is existing damaged fence, it will be replaced with the black coated fence.
That is correct. In the project right of ways, and we can replace the fence, we will with the PVC coated fence.
Okay, next question. Who is selecting the artwork on the bridge columns? That's a good question and a good point of clarification. INDOT is not providing art for the bridge columns. And Ken and Ron, feel free to pipe in here. They are providing space for the opportunity for art to be there, but they are not providing the art as part of that project. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And that does go back to the early discussions with some of the different groups that we met with during the development of the design guidelines. The physical panels that those art pieces can be attached to are being done in a way that if art is not added to them at some point, they still can stand alone visually, but with the idea that there could be opportunities for future sculptural elements or murals or whatever is finally determined for that at some other point by others to be applied to that.
Next, it looks like a comment here. The bridge cross sections need a buffer between the vehicle travel way and the pedestrian way, i.e. bollards. Are we planning on including bollards, Ken or Ron?
That was not part of the aesthetic design guidelines for the underpasses.
Next question, fixtures for lighting appear vulnerable to vandalism and maintenance operations. Who is maintaining the fixtures? The lights on the bridges and the underpasses will be maintained by INDOT. Few more questions here and then we'll continue. Adding street names to bridges overhead seems misleading or superfluous. Can the text indicate which neighborhood one is entering by passing under the bridge instead of the name on the street on which you are already traveling? The aesthetic design guidelines did include the local street names, and that is what we're moving forward with at this time. In light of that answer about maintenance, will the KIV trees planted along Pine and Davidson be protected throughout all of the construction process? Yes and no. This is a kind of a two-part answer. There are trees along the west side of the interstate near Davidson that are within a do not disturb area that will be protected through the construction process. Now, the trees along Pine Street on the east side of the interstates were not considered do not disturb areas and may have actually already been impacted. But those areas will be replanted with trees and native vegetation. Last question we have right now, and I'm going to direct this to Jeff or Mohammed. What was the overall budget for the project, and is it within the time and budget at this point?
I'll take this. So yes, the original budget was I don't know what INDOT's budget was, but I know what the price we submitted was $320 million. And as far as whether it's on budget, yes, it is. As far as the time, we are on time as of right now to have the project opened to unrestricted traffic probably by, or not probably, but by Thanksgiving next year. Does that mean we're going to be done? No, we're going to have some things that we have to clean up between November and April or May of the following year. We're probably not going to have all the plantings in until probably May or June of the following year, just because we can't plant during certain times because of germination and all this other stuff. So to answer your question, yes, we are on time, and yes, we are on budget.
Great, thank you, Jeff. We're going to keep going now and talk a little bit more about landscaping. There'll be opportunities for questions after that portion as well.
Okay, so as a part of the design guideline process, the design guidelines were published with a list of landscape typologies that were to be deployed in the project area. I'll just go through those kind of quickly now, but type 1 or the purple are the do not disturb areas. You'll see that in several places in the project, but a series of areas where the existing vegetation is to remain. And then the yellow or type 2 is turf grass buffer. There are places where, for safety of motorists and others, we'll have a turf grass buffer that keeps everything, the sight lines open and so forth. The type 3 typologies in the green are side slope plantings. So the slopes adjacent to the travel lanes on the interstate will be planted in a prescribed manner. The type 4 screen plantings are immediately adjacent to the sound barriers on the residential side of the barrier. So there's some prescribed plantings that would include more evergreens, and the intent is to make the sound barriers, the visual impact of them, try to reduce the visual impact of the sound barriers. And the type 5 typologies are specific to the interchange plantings. And then the type 6 are specific to the detention basin plantings, and with the intent of making sure that what we plant there are plants that will survive temporary inundation with stormwater. Next slide, please. So this is just an image, a series of images that we thought would be good to show. So when we talk about native grasses and forbs or wildflowers, these are the kinds of images that we have in mind. So just to give you a general sense, all native material that are native to the Midwest. Next slide, please. So the design guidelines, published documents like this that laid out some requirements for areas, the purple being do not disturb areas, the yellow being turf grass buffer, and the green being the type 3 side slope plantings of native grasses, wildflowers, trees, shrubs. And I think that's it. And the dark green are the interchange plantings you can see on the right side of the image. They're similar to the type 3, but specific to the interchange. Next slide, please. Okay, so starting at the west leg, west of the interchange, in the vicinity of New Jersey and Alabama Central Avenue, we have illustrated, we'll show you a series of planting plans that show illustratively the intended plantings along sections of the interstate. And the graphics will generally be consistent. The tan are the do not disturb areas. The light green are the side slope plantings, which are trees, shrubs, native grasses, wildflowers. And then you see the tree locations shown here. The dark green larger circles are canopy trees, and then the smaller red circles are ornamental trees. Next slide, please. So this will be typical of several locations on the project. We'll show you some sections through the side slopes to give you just a little bit of a sense of the sort of three-dimensional characteristics at various locations. So you can see where this section is cut. It's cut looking east in the vicinity of the Old North Side and St. Joseph historic districts. And I'll just start on the right side of the section here at the right-of-way line and work my way in, and then switch to the other side. So we have a do not disturb zone on the right side of the image here that will transition into type 3 plantings between the do not disturb area and the travel lanes. So that type 3B plantings are native grasses and wildflowers. And then on the left side, again, starting at the right-of-way line, we have some existing plant material that's going to remain in a preservation zone inside of it. And then again, type 3B plantings adjacent to the travel lanes, which is native grasses and wildflowers. Next slide, please. So this is a another area on the west leg, just west of the interchange. And again, an illustration, very similar plan illustration, very similar to what we showed you on the last area. The canopy trees, ornamental trees, side slope plantings with the native grasses and wildflowers. So essentially from the travel lanes south to the do not disturb areas, that the entire ground plane will be native grasses and wildflowers. And then in the island here in between the travel lanes is an area of type 5 plantings, canopy trees, ornamental trees, and then the sort of rust colored area is native grasses and wildflowers, areas where tree plantings are restricted for safety reasons. So again, you can see similar kind of character in the development of the planting plan on the north side of that section of the interstate. Next slide, please. And we have a section on the south side of that area. You can see the location, that section again, is looking east. And this is in the vicinity of the Chatham Arch Historic District. Starting at the right-of-way line on the right side of the image, we have a tree preservation or a landscape preservation area there, do not disturb area, that transitions into a type 3A, which is canopy trees, ornamental trees, native grasses, wildflowers, and then into a 3B, which is native grasses and wildflowers. Next slide, please. So then we move into the interchange. The design guidelines again established a lot of requirements for the character. Next slide, please. And in this particular slide, we're looking at the north, would be the northwest corner area of the interchange, and it includes the area of the detention basin. So you can see the layout of the proposed tree plantings, ornamental and canopy trees, the yellow or turf grass buffer areas. There's one around the detention basin for maintenance access for NDOT, and the plantings inside the detention basin area are native grasses and wildflowers that will tolerate temporary inundation during storm events. And then the dark green are the type 5 typology plantings of native grasses and wildflowers, and then some do not disturb areas. And you can see the plantings along the north side of the Monon Loop, for a number of trees being planted north of the Monon. And then some areas in the rust color and the yellow color associated with restricted tree zones and for safety. And then some of these yellow areas are for maintenance and drainage, swales, and so forth. Next slide, please. So then we're looking at the southwest portion of the interchange. Very similar graphics, so you can quickly get a feel for how the tree plantings are laid out, canopy and ornamentals. The rust color again are native grasses and wildflowers, where we have restricted trees for safety reasons. And the yellow, in this particular case here with this yellow area is associated with a drainage swale. So NDOT has a requirement for access in those drainage swales for maintenance purposes to make sure the drainage stays open. And so we've accommodated that. And then the dark green and light green areas are native grasses and wildflowers. Next slide, please. So here's a section in that general area. You can see the location of that section in the vicinity of the Massachusetts Avenue Historic District. And I'll start on the right side again here at the travel lanes, and adjacent to the travel lanes, we have some type 5B native grass wildflower plantings, and then a type 2, typology 2 turf grass planting, which occurs at a drainage swale. So we maintain access for the drainage swale. And then we go into a large zone of type 5A, which are canopy trees, ornamental trees, underlaid with native grasses and wildflowers. And on the left side, at the right-of-way line, we have a type 2, typology 2 turf grass buffer, a new walk, and then more of the typology 2 turf grass that transitions back into the 5A. Next slide, please. So now we're depicting an area that's in the southeast portion of the interchange. Similar graphics. The yellow areas here are for drainage swale maintenance, drainage access. The rust color are type 5 typology with restrictions on tree plantings. And the dark green are native grasses, and light green are native grasses and wildflower plantings. Next slide, please. We have a section cut through that general area. And you can see the general location here is adjacent to the Monon Trail. I'll start at the right-of-way line on the right side of the image, working in. So we have a typology 2 turf grass planting to the right of the Monon Trail and to the left both. And there's a drainage swale in here. So this particular section is reflecting a preferred planting of mowable lawn adjacent to the trail, plus access requirements for a drainage swale. And then we move into type 5A zone of plantings, which is native grasses, wildflowers, trees, shrubs, native grasses and wildflowers up to the travel lanes. So we'd have a large area of native grass and wildflowers overplanted with trees and shrubs. Next slide, please. So then we're going to move to the east leg, just east of the interchange. And again, the design guidelines laid out many of the requirements. Next slide, please. So an illustrative drawing depicting the layout of the trees and various typologies. So again, the yellow, for instance, down here is associated with a drainage swale, maintenance access, large area of native grasses, wildflowers, with shrubs, canopy trees, ornamental trees, south side of the interchange. On the north side, we have a condition that we haven't really spoken about yet. We have a sound barrier in this particular location adjacent to the travel lanes. And that as a result of the design guidelines, we have included some specialty plantings in that particular area to begin to try to mitigate the visual impact of the sound barrier from the residential side. So next slide. So this is that area in section. You can see down here where the section is generally cut. Again, it's looking eastbound, starting at the right-of-way line on the right side of the section. We have a typology 2 turf grass planting for the drainage swale area, and then a 3B planting of native grasses and wildflowers up to the travel lanes. And then switching to the left side of the section and working our way in, we have the turf grass plantings. Then we have a type 3A planting of native trees, shrubs, native grasses, and wildflowers. And then we have a condition here where this is the sound wall, the heavy dark line is actually a sound wall. So in this particular case, we have screen plantings that includes evergreen shrubs and trees that will be more successful in the winter months of screening mitigating the visual impact of the sound barriers. And then between the sound barrier and the travel lanes, we have a typology 2 turf grass planting. Next slide, please. So now we're at the south leg of the proposed improvements, and area just south of the interchange itself. Again, design guidelines laid out much of the landscape typology requirements. Next slide, please. And an illustrative drawing showing the proposed plantings. You can see where the trees are located. The rust areas are native grasses. The rust areas and the light green areas are native grasses and wildflowers. And then the yellow are turf type plantings, grass plantings for maintenance access. Next slide, please. And a section through that area, and you can see again where the section's cut. It's generally cut looking northeast. And it's generally in the vicinity of the Lockerbie Square, Cottage Home historic districts. And starting on the right side, we have an area of typology 2 turf grass plantings, an area of 3A plantings of canopy trees and shrubs and native grasses and wildflowers. And then we go into a zone of typology 2 turf grass, and then back into a 3B of native grasses and wildflowers. Switching to the left side, starting at the right of way line, working in with typology 2 turf grass plantings, area of type 3 plantings of canopy trees, ornamental trees, shrubs, native grasses, and wildflowers, and then a 5B planting that has native grasses and wildflowers. Next slide, please. So we've moved a little further south than to the south limits of the project on the south leg. And next slide, please. So then the illustrative drawing showing the general layout of the proposed plantings. Just to give you a little bit more orientation here, this is the off-ramp from the travel lanes down to Ohio Street, and then this is the roadway that passes under the bridge from Ohio Street and transitions into Pine. So it gives you a pretty good feel for how the plantings are going to be done in that general area. Next slide, please. So this particular section is cut in the vicinity of the Holy Cross Westminster Historic Districts, and starting at the right side of the image, at the right of way line, working our way up, we have some typology 2 turf grass buffer zone, and then a couple of type 3 typology areas, canopy trees, ornamental trees, shrubs, native grasses, native wildflowers. Next slide, please.
Okay, we're going to pause for just a second. And we do have several questions to answer. So the first one, Jeff from Superior, I'm going to direct this one to you. Are there financial incentives or penalties relating to the finish timeline?
There are no incentives, but there are definitely penalties. And what those are, I will just not answer that question at this point. If you want more information, just talk to Kia. It's a convoluted mess. It's anywhere from $100,000 to $1 million a day for every day we're late, based upon what's open and what's not.
And I believe Superior is doing their best to not incur any of those penalties.
We are not going to incur penalties, no.
Okay, we did have a follow-up regarding the retention pond. So follow-up question on the retention pond area by O'Bannon Park. Can the land leading up to the pond be used for additional park-related uses? Or will the fences be adjacent to the new section of the Monon Trail? I'm going to answer the first part and send the second part to Jeff. No, that land will remain as transportation right-of-way. However, it will be planted in more trees and vegetation, so there will hopefully be a better visual barrier between the park and the actual interchange itself. But Jeff, could you confirm that the new fence will be south of that new Monon Trail loop?
If I remember my section correctly on the Monon loop, I think you get fence on both sides of the trail.
Okay.
So there will be fence, and to answer the question, I mean, probably not. To answer your first question, I agree with you. I don't believe there's going to be any opportunities there.
Right. Okay, next question is about parking lots. Will the parking lots under the interstate at 12th and Delaware still be parking lots when the project is completed? The answer to that question is yes. I don't think you can access them right now for safety reasons due to construction. But once construction is completed and there's not work happening there, they will return to parking lots. Ken, we have a question about side slope sections. Along the side slope sections, is it possible to modify the proposal to include tall trees or evergreens to mitigate the impact of the walls?
Yeah, I think that's has a financial impact. As you know, we have a team that's put forth a price based upon specific criteria. So that would probably entail an impact to the costs. And beyond, if you put costs aside, is it possible? Probably. One of the concerns we're dealing with, Meg, on the project in general is planting of large material on very steep slopes. So a lot of these slopes are one vertical to two horizontal. So quite steep for plantings, and something we need to be mindful about.
Okay, our next question is about trees along the Monon Trail. So can more shade trees be planted along the Monon Trail? There isn't anyone that will mow the proposed lawn. I guess Ron or Ken, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that we used a 10-foot buffer from the edge of trail for tree plantings just to try to avoid the trees getting into the trail itself. Is that correct?
So give me
it was 20 foot, Kia.
It was 20?
It's 10 foot, I think. Just a second, Kia.
Okay.
So is it possible to plant more shade trees along the Monon Trail? I think that's a conversation we can entertain, but we believe we've met the requirements of the design guidelines. And
I think let's take a look at that. I'm not promising anything, Meg, but if there are areas where maybe it'd be possible, I still think we want to keep the buffer. We don't want the trees in the trail. And there may be some private property. NDOT can only plant on their own property. We can't plant on other people's property. I think to the east, NDOT doesn't necessarily own that. But we will at least take a look at it. Erica, this one is for you. I am looking for the prior meeting recordings. Are those posted on the website? And is it possible to send a link if they're not easy to find on the North Split website?
Currently, they're not posted on the website. We were waiting for this last meeting to occur, and then I will post those out. And then at the link /northsplit.com/landscape, that's where they'll be located.
So the same place where you can, if you want to take a look at all of the landscape plan sheets, that's where they will be located. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
All right. Ken, do you have any quantifiable summaries of how much planting will be done? For example, acres of new greenery or number of trees, etc. And where are the aforementioned public art opportunities? On the retaining walls of the major gateway bridges?
Okay, so to the first question, there absolutely are quantities identified within the planting plan drawings that have been made available. And I'm not going to try to tell you where that is. I'm going to let Kia or Eric answer that. But we definitely have quantities. And we would, rather than give you specific numbers at this point in time, we'll say there are thousands of trees and lots of native grass and wildflowers. Otherwise, we probably shouldn't, we'll need to open up, you'll need to open up the planting plans that are available on the website. And then with regard to where are the aforementioned public art opportunities, there's certainly some on the monuments, but I'll let Ron or someone else speak to the broader public art agenda.
And during the design guideline process, the two probably most visible areas for the inclusion of future public art was on the monuments, and then on in some of the underpass areas, there's some panels that have been designated to be able to support those types of art. That being said, I think that there probably are other opportunities out there for neighborhoods that may want to do something adjacent to the right of way, but the two major areas along the infrastructure are those two areas.
Thanks, Ron. I'm going to jump in on to give a little bit maybe more clarification on the planting and the acres and number of trees, et cetera. If you actually go on to norsplit.com/landscape, there is a link for preliminary landscape plans. And it's not the first page, it may be the second or third page. I believe it includes the number of trees and shrubs per planting zone, as well as perhaps, I don't want to promise this, the square footage of those zones. So that may provide a little bit more quantifiable information if that's what you're looking for. And kind of a comment or a suggestion we have to respond to the side slope answer, you could plant smaller shade trees on the steep slopes. Question about, I think, right-of-way acquisition. Will any of the projects involve eminent domain? And the answer to that is no. There is no right-of-way acquisition as part of this project. All work will take place within existing transportation right-of-way. And at this point, I am not seeing any additional questions. So Erica, do you want to wrap it up for us?
Sure. Well, as I said at the beginning, please submit your comments on the landscape plans. As Kia said, those are located at norsplit.com/landscape. For those comments, please email at info@norsplit.com. And if you are not comfortable with mail, we also have the hard mail, and those can be mailed to me, attention Erica Johnson, at Monument Circle, Suite 1200. Again, the comment period ends Friday, December 10th, 2021. Next steps, we'll have this finishes and includes our virtual public update meetings. We'll have once we receive all the comments back by December 10th, we'll start to compile those, work with the design build consulting group to address and provide comments and responses to those. Then we'll hold another virtual public update meeting. And then I just wanted to let everybody know that the roadway will be fully open to motorists in late 2022, which is pretty exciting. And then for those comments or questions that were not related to the landscape, I know we sometimes in the past on our other presentations, we've had questions that were a little bit not associated with landscape. Did want to remind everybody to use NDOT for you. If you do see something out there as far as potholes or trucks, we're receiving those comments and responses and helping address those concerns that you have. Use ndotforyou.com, or you can call 855-NDOT-FOR-YOU, or you can email ndot@ndot.in.gov. Those come straight to the NorSplit communication team. It's not just to a void box that you think. They actually come to myself and a group of us on the project team to be able to address. And then if you haven't had a chance, please visit the website. We have construction photos up there, as well as construction info and maps and detour maps and updates on upcoming closures. We also have a video gallery and a media room with additional information and frequently asked questions. And then if you haven't liked us, please follow us on Facebook at norsplit.com for Twitter at NorSplit, for Instagram at ND NorSplit, and you can also text 468-311 to receive additional updates on traffic restrictions and closures.
And Erica, we have one more question, if I could butt in for just a minute. Question about the original design plan. And Ron, I'm probably going to direct this to you. Didn't the design plan require evergreen trees in the interchange? And it's my recollection, and Ron, please correct me if I'm wrong, that the original aesthetic design guidelines only included evergreen trees along the north side of I-70 east of the interchange where the noise barriers were going to be.
Yeah, that is correct. We were pretty judicious in the use of evergreens throughout the interchange. I think that part of the intent with the urban forest concept was to create something that was native to this area, was something that you would have seen here, and there's a limited availability on what those evergreen species could be. And I think there were also some concerns with the evergreens that were native. There were some concerns about disease and pest control and things like that. And then I think the other item was that, you know, the evergreens tend to have the larger base, meaning that we were trying to get more tree canopy in there and more trees planted, and felt like if we put too many evergreens out into the interchange that we would start to reduce the overall number of trees. So we limited that to areas where we were trying to screen the backside of the sound walls from the adjacent neighborhoods.
All right, that's all we have.
Thank you, everyone. And again, the information is out on the website for review.